Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Daily AI Show. Today, we're going to be talking about, does Netflix have any chill? And that's basically just an umbrella term for us to discuss AI in filmmaking or AI in Hollywood today. Launching us off is the topic of how big studios like Netflix are now using AI in their film production process. Today, I'm joined by Beth and Andy, and I am Jumi. And like I said, today is Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025, and this is the Daily AI Show. So, to give a little bit of background for everybody who's not familiar, over the last couple of years, roughly around 2023, we saw a lot of movement about AI in Hollywood and its potentials and its pitfalls. All right. So we had the double strike by both the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Guild, that they had issues and with AI, and they were at the ripe moment of renegotiating any possible contracts with the producers, Hollywood producers, and the big streaming companies, and all of them collectively. So one of the big things that they got out of these union negotiations is that there be explicit consent in using any replica of their likeness, voice, if they're going to be adjusted or their acting's going to be adjusted. When it comes to the writing side, recognizing that AI is a tool and not an actual writer, so you can't you can't replace writers out of the writing process, and a lot of these uh, little but significant steps towards monitoring and guiding how AI is going to be used in Hollywood or in big budget filmmaking. So that's the basic premise of where we're jumping off now. What we're seeing now, just 2 years later, is companies and studios using their AI models, whether it be specifically trained or in partnership with companies like Runway. There's a famous story about how Lionsgate and Runway are working together, forming their own AI model process or their AI workflow. But today, the latest story is that Netflix admits that they're using AI. They used AI specifically for some visual effects or VFX scenes in their series, The Eighth or Not. So this is the general topic and subject that we're talking about today. What I think I'd like to start off is and open it both to Andy and Beth are what is the what is your take on how AI could potentially be a good or a pro or a con for artists? We've been hearing um, a lot of pushback from artists in various fields, like stories recently about authors trying to get copyright cases pushed through, and just general, the data grab that large foundational AI model companies have been doing regarding IP and creative works. Not to mention, we can go into talking about copyright and all of that kind of minefield. So I'd want to get your initial thoughts on what do you think about the state of AI and its pros and cons, specifically in filmmaking?
So, Andy, you are muted, and I'm unmuted first, so I'm on go. I think the biggest, I think the biggest advantage here is in alignment with what Netflix said about the use of AI in this particular show. What it said was It was completed 10 times faster, but also the cost of it wouldn't have been feasible for a show in that budget. And I think that is the biggest benefit, not just for Netflix. We know Netflix and studios are going to make that choice, but it is a democratization, right? You could conceivably get together with friends, with colleagues, with your improv troupe, and put together shows that are, if not studio level quality, really close, much closer than you could have gotten 2 years ago, right? And the learning curve is a learning curve, but it's not the same kind of learning curve, right? If you understand, if you're learning how to prompt and communicate with AI, um, that is carrying over a little bit. Certainly it helps if you know how directors talk about like camera angles and screenshots and those kinds of setups, but it's not like you're learning to use a particular camera or a particular software that then isn't going to be used now because we're moving in this direction. Like, I feel like the learning curve here is a little overlapped. But Andy, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me is the breakthrough that George Lucas and Lucasfilm made in 1977 with the release of Star Wars, which, from my experience in 1977, was a light speed jump to light speed in film, fantasy film production. And the technology that was employed to do that was considerable. And it was a major investment, of course. And I never once thought, oh my gosh, well, this is actually going to implicate the animators or whoever else was involved in the previous phase of technology for film production. I think there's more concern about that now because of the incredible speed and comprehensiveness of video production, just from language prompts and the ability to modify using AI as an assistant in adjusting frame by frame what is output by that. So there's definitely a concern on that side, but I frankly don't care, and I hope for the further and further introduction of AI production technologies in film, not to try to reproduce what are sort of typical rom-coms or dramas where there are mostly human actors in the film, but where science fiction can go, and where other fantasy intersections like um, Roger Rabbit, where there was a technological blend of human actors and animation. All of those things now are much more readily available to smaller and smaller teams. So the other point I wanted to make about it is, social media has advanced a very short form video idea, right? People are willing to scroll through very short clips that are produced by somebody, who's, and this is part of the democratization of higher quality film production, or video production, I should say, not film. Film, I think, in the newest parlance, will connote a feature length, video production, as opposed to, even though we've long ago abandoned using actual film in the process. But anyway, I think there's a possibility that there could be a whole new thing happening that's akin to YouTube, but which is focused on creative, artistic video production in short form, that people just find, as accessible and entertaining as the current TV series, where you see episode after episode, and people watch them from start to finish if it's a short sequence, like only 8 episodes, so you binge watch that thing. I think that there's the possibility of individual creators, Beth, you, Junmi, you, put together a 5-minute film that is provocative and interesting and fantastical. And so I'm optimistic about there being the emergence of new models of video entertainment that go beyond the work that Netflix and Prime Studios and others are doing.
Right. And it does seem to me like the way the framing that this sets up is an either or, and it feels like it's not necessarily an either or, that we're pushed into that, while also acknowledging that the film industry employs film and show industries employ a giant number of employees. So if we're moving into a scenario in which, and labor is still really strong there, right, in a way that it's not as strong in, like, there isn't a coders labor, there isn't a coders union, right? So as we're seeing things affect people who get paid to code, because AI is definitely in that in that industry. I don't know, it's an industry segment. That's a good generic word. There isn't a organized labor that is pushing back and messaging around this, and there definitely is within all of these places in film and video production. But like, even before this, there were low budget, like, you could go with your buddies if your dad had bought whatever it's a camera with an 8 in its name and a dome super 8, maybe, whatever that was. Like, there were ways to sort of approximate, but you could never approximate the value, like the production value, on such a low budget. Is the dichotomy that we're sort of seeing, is that false? Is that like separating? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So a little bit of history, and maybe this is a framework based on what both of you have been saying, is this is an opportunity that needs to be, you must have awareness on, and you must have input on, because it tends to be, to snowball, right? Film specifically is known to have great leaps in technology that have affected the entire industry in one form or another, right? We can talk a little bit about like the transition from practical effects to CGI effects. CGI is in everything now, right? But early on, using Star Wars in it as an example, you saw less than 1% of 1% of that film was any form, even rudimentary form of CGI at the time, and they did everything with practical effects, inventing whole new subgenre of filmmaking for it, for that film series. But as we see over time, and with the launch of something like Jurassic Park, CGI as a technology was used heavily, both in the creation of various characters, and how it, and how it added to the narrative storytelling and those different aspects. But this is something that happened in less than 20 years, going from point A to point B. And we're seeing the similar kind of progression with AI technology.
Right.
So filmmaking, like I said, has these big jumps, has these very big disruptive technology jumps as well. Take, for example, like Andy said, digital versus film, right? While there are still diehards and artistic reasons why film is still used, it's not in the mainstream. Mostly everything is digital. And one of those things that came out of it was the development of digital cameras, right? Having DSLRs, being able to provide a high production value, high quality, like you were mentioning, Beth, for the video itself. and lowering that bar or democratizing the entry point for filmmaking. So there's a lot of hope that AI is going to have a similar effect. Will it be disruptive? Absolutely. It's going to be disruptive. And this is one of the reasons why I applaud the labor unions like SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild to get ahead of it as much as they can, so that they have the input and the place at the table when it comes to discussing how AI will be implemented. Because if you're not there to speak about your concerns, you're just going to get steamrolled, right? And studios are just like any corporation. Their concern is to make money, and to make the most money, you reduce the most costs wherever those costs may be. And so I can easily see how studios are looking at AI to be the next tool to engage with viewers, to capture more market, to make more content or better content for more people, right? And so I think the big questions that both of you are breaking up is, where are the lines that must be drawn? What's the true potential, and what kind of things can we do to highlight that? So for the Netflix example, I think it's an ideal example of where we will see AI used successfully and consistently, right? Everyone's always, when people talk about AI, and specifically like in film or in Hollywood and things like that, they talk about the grandiose things, right? The really hyped things. This is what we're going to see, like 10 years in the future, 20 years in the future. Everyone's going to have their own personalized movie that they can just speak to their app or their AI, and they'll build it for them. I am pretty sure that's coming. When and how far down the line, I'm not exactly sure. But for right now, where I see the implementations, and we'll call it, for lack of a better term, healthy implementations of AI, is things like what Netflix is doing. The budget for that show, which is much smaller than a show that included budgets for large VFX scenes. They used it in one way to create this okay, we're back. All right, so I'll go back just a second to finish up my thought.
Thanks.
So the implementation that Netflix I see of AI through VFX is one of the more healthier ways to start using AI in your workflow or your production workflow, because they used it with a project that didn't have the budget for a lot of or major VFX shots, right? And so they used it in one particular scene. It was for a building collapsing in Buenos Aires, right? They wanted to create this shot for its narrative and impact and things like that. So they used AI to help generate that scene. And this is, I think, where we're going to see it go in that direction. I think, shows ago, we talked about whether a AI film would ever win an Oscar, and we gave our Nostradamus calls of how far out and what the pros and cons of what that would mean. But one of the things that we talked about was in the animation space. Now, whether that be a visual effect, CG animation, or simulate a 2D animation style, this is the direction I think we'll start seeing more and more AI, because it's more acceptable for the audience, right? Because we know that they didn't actually blow up a building for Buenos Aires shot. They didn't do that. We know that. We know that it would just be traditional CG that would have created that shot. So from the audience point of view, is there is there really a difference if one kind of computer tool did it over a different kind of computer tool, right? You still need people to use that tool to create it. It's one subset versus another subset. And I think that's one of the kind of questions that we have to ask is where are those lines? What are our concerns with that?
Andy?
I wanted to address, a theme that emerged in the chat, which is that any use of AI for generative video for feature-length production and or even short-form video for entertainment is intellectual property theft, because the models were trained on video that they didn't get permission for example. Now, there may be models that were trained on, some, accidental inclusions of highly protected, films, for example, like, or some of them have, been classics for so long that they could have been used without, much objection by, the owners of the intellectual property. But I think that the concern about general intellectual property theft as a killer argument for eliminating AI in general use for prompt-driven video generation is not going to hold water either against the tide of interest and demand for more and more proficient and democratized video production. And importantly, I think that once you get to the point where an AI can use its generalized understanding of physics and facial forms and different, the large variation of human conformation, gait, and generate a totally new instance of a human that's faithful as a reproduction of a possible human, but is not directly a copy of any human out there. I think that argument kind of goes away. And I think that's what we're going to see increasingly when we see major studios like Netflix generate either visual effects and or characters that are included in the video, but who aren't SAG-AFTRA members. So anyway, that's my point. I think that there is a transition that's happening here, and that doesn't excuse the case where somebody is without permission using the exact likeness or a very close simile of a known actor or actor, and that's definitely something that will be challenged in the courts.
So I think this brings up a larger nuanced conversation that I think we need to have. And I know that we are having it, and even we're having it in the chat, but I know I do not see it in like the larger context. And the truth is that some works can be reproduced by AI, word for word, pixel for pixel, all of that. Some works can, and some works can't. And training the model, you don't know which are going to be which, because you're not training a model to exactly reproduce this, but not exactly reproduce this. And you could even be training a model to not exactly reproduce anything, but that isn't how AI works. Again, AI training is a little more like gardening than it is like doing a paint by numbers kind of thing, or writing code that has a definitive result. You can put stuff in the soil so you get big tomatoes, and some of them will be big and some of them will not, right? And like it's just a different thing. And yes, There is a non-compensation thing, and as we start to use digital humans as opposed to actual actors, that I think for me that's the bigger concern and all of it. I sort of wrote a thing last night about looking at all of the jobs that are associated, right? Like was looking at this like, ooh, it's like CGI. Uh no, right? Like it isn't the change that happened with CGI. It isn't the change when animators started to be able to use onion skinning technology and then started to be able to use technology where you could like more finely define how a character was going to move, those kinds of things, motion cap, right? Those technologies have shifted over time, but those are still pretty much just in the animator realm. What is happening now affects everything because a digital actor doesn't sleep, speaks every language, can change costume with a click, doesn't need a driver, doesn't have assistant, doesn't have to walk from the trailer to the set, doesn't need a trailer, doesn't need any space, right? Doesn't need a driver. I mean, doesn't need insurance. Insurance doesn't care whether that stunt is really dangerous because there's no human life actually involved in it. I mean, you can just go and watch the dominoes, right? I have a friend from childhood who, and I don't understand a lot of the film industry, but they were in the camera operator sequence. So they moved from maybe the person whose job is to set up the camera for the scene, and then the camera operator will come and do the actual shot. And so I think they moved from the bottom rung to the middle rung. And I don't know if they ever rose to the top rung, but that's not the point of this. The point of this is that those three positions no longer exist in this context or no longer have to exist in the context of making things with digital media. And that one camera operator can operate all cameras or most cameras on this because we're just setting up scenes and then generating them. Like that I think is the real piece of this. And I also think that it's interesting to have the conversation because everybody experiences media. So this isn't like a niche thing that no one has an opinion about. And it is, I think, our most powerful lobby at this point in the US. Maybe like manufacturing, car maker kind of things. But I feel like each piece of the filmmaking industry, as far as I know, like most of the pieces still have some sort of labor component that weighs in on this. Is that true, Jimmy? Maybe if you're like a craft supplier, there's no craft
Yeah,
supply labor.
there usually is some larger organization for the larger pieces, right? Where there's more people. So actors, writers, the grips, electrical, grip and electric, they have their own unions. I believe food service falls under another union, a much larger union for food service workers. So yes, everyone has their labor union, or most people do, and their job as that union is to protect those jobs, to protect their livelihood. And I think you do bring up an awareness of how in-depth AI will touch everything in the industry, right? I think a lot of it is, if we remember our past technological jumps, they have had these huge, interconnections. I think as with everything AI is just so much faster and affects so much more people all at once. So it's good to bring up those discussion points. And that's one of the reasons that the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA had their strikes, is because they knew that this oncoming wave was going to happen. And so they were trying to get in ahead of that wave. Now, when we talk about anyone that's below the line or who's part of the crew as opposed to the cast, or above the line like directors, um, the work that they do does usually get glossed over, right? And you can't have a film unless you have all of these people working together. I think what you touched upon is the technology even replacing or affecting those individuals as well, in terms of the camera operator analogy was perfect. It's, if your camera operation is now fully automated, then in one form or another, then you don't need as many people to do that. A good example is the volume. So the volume is a virtual studio space, right? It's nearly all LEDs, LED screens that they use gaming engines to create backgrounds, right? That is one layer, and everyone's seen shots of, like, in Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, where they're acting in front of green screens or blue screens, and these are just entire studios like that. The volume is just the next iteration of that. It's, we can rapidly change the scene background so we can set up new scenes. All of the cameras are on automated robotic arms so that they can work with the parallax of the screen, working in parallel with the cinematographer to design how they want that camera movement. All of that can be automated now. So it's just a matter of expense. And AI shows everyone, oh, hey, this is going to be cheaper and cheaper. Like you said, Netflix said that it was 10 times faster and far less expensive to do this particular shot, this VFX, in AI. Those are metrics that are going to be expected and hoped for by those who hold the purse strings, so to speak, when it comes to creating content or creating films or video or anything like that. So they're going to want the least expensive way. And when that becomes your focus, when the money component becomes the focus, that's going to scare a lot of people, right? Because most people are in film industry because there's some sort of craftsmanship or artistry as part of what led them into it, right? And this is the kind of thing that they want to express, right? And this is art for art's sake, and the kind of human expression and exploration that we can get from this particular medium. Not to go down that road too much, but this is the kind of thing that people are constantly trying to protect against from from the realities of it requires money. So in this current system, there has to be constant vigilance in saying, hey, this is still important. People are still important. Don't attack it from that side if you're worried about generating money for whatever your goals are. It's funny because when I was thinking about this situation and looking up some for reference material, I really understood that humans' version of the paperclip problem is current corporate structure, and it didn't used to be that way. And I'm wondering, I'll need to go back. I'm digressing here. Sorry, but it's an interesting way to realization where when it comes to art, um, being being reminded of why it's important to us. And so I think this is beyond a labor issue, beyond a technological leap. And there's definite pros and cons. I'm a big proponent of democratization and lowering that bar of entry and get more people to be able to express themselves. That's one of my overall guiding principles when looking at AI. But how do we do it in the most healthy way? What is that progression? So I'd love thoughts on what do we see for the future, and what kind of steps that we need to take to make sure that that future becomes reality.
I think this is surfacing the like I think this is surfacing human resources as a dehumanizing calculation. And it didn't used to be, at least from my position. I was never as high up in an organization as Andy, so I'm really curious what your, I mean, I was high up in my company, but I was never high up in a large corporation that was set up that way. But I do think that often what we're talking about in this kind of conversation is we're pitting the the workers who don't use AI and have an expertise with the workers who do use AI and have an expertise. And there is an invisible layer up top that is saying, if I can get this cheaper, then I'm going to do that, and the profit structure is going to stay the same, right? Sort of the idea of a corporation saying, you know what, I could do the same work with fewer people, or I could do the same work with the same number of people who work fewer hours. Now, we've had this conversation on the show, and Andy, you have said it's not always about what the CEO thinks. You have a fiduciary responsibility to be as profitable, maybe as your company can be. But that, I think, by nature, at some point, just looks at livelihood and the humans that you employ as like little balls of how much you can charge for them, or how much they contribute to the finances of the business. And I'm super curious if we are moving outside of that as a largely sustainable thing for people in general. And what we talk about when we talk about this is UBI, universal basic income, should pick up the slack, not a different corporate structure. And I don't know, it's probably not easier to convince corporations than it is to convince governments. But I don't know, like all these people, well, yeah. Andy.
Well, I'll say that as someone who was involved in major corporations before personal computing, which meant that the only computing that was done inside the corporation was in the information technology, bowels of the building, where they had a big mainframe, and some systems were available back then to effectively automate certain functions like accounting. There were systems that were big enough to handle something that was real drudgery for many, but that didn't eliminate accountants. The accountants still had to feed those machines. Well, we're getting to the point where there's not a lot of supervision required in the computing infrastructure that we have. And the knee-jerk reaction of many CEOs that I've spoken to is, hey, tell me about, how can I replace all these people, and why they're under pressure to, in many cases, in competitive marketplaces, it's not all about, oh, I need to double my profit from my already high profit level. It's like, can I get my company to survive? Because it's really in a cash bind. We're barely making enough money to cover all our expenses. So I need to do this for the survival of the largest number of the employees who will remain. So I have some empathy for both sides of that equation, but there are cases where it's just not necessary, to eliminate positions. I would argue in the government, that's probably the case. But I wanted to shift a little bit over to what I think is a parallel development that raises the question of authenticity and the importance of authenticity to the audience. And that parallel is in the emergence of AI-generated bands. So I heard an article recently, like in the last 10 days or so, about this, where somewhere on the Billboard 100, there's an AI-generated song from an AI-generated band, and the people listening to the streams found that song to be really compelling, and so that moved it up the charts. And then, as part of that discussion on, I think it was on NPR, there was, these K-pop bands and a specific K-pop band that it doesn't have any real humans on screen, but they're doing their live videos and performances, and it's all AI generated. Now, I'll hasten to add that apparently there were some live actual K-pop performers who did some of the vocals for those, but the videos of their performances were of AI characters that don't exist. So that's very akin, in my view, to what we're seeing now in feature film production, where AI elements are finding their way into the final cut. So does it matter whether there are real live humans available to go on tour? There's an interesting show, I think it's in London, where a major band from the rock and roll era appears on stage. It's ABBA, right? And they're all digitally generated, almost holographic images presented on stage, but those are performing as representations of the real ABBA performers who are still alive, right? They could be on stage, but they're not going to do that, 3 shows a day, night after night. And so this is a digital performance, but it's drawing enormous crowds, and they're really satisfied with that ABBA concert.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
and the
changes
people
in
still,
technology, and the question is, do audiences really care about whether it's authentic or not?
it's an interesting thing, I think, because we've seen this in other ways as well. When someone knows that it was created with AI, they have they prefer it less. Like when they have that information, they don't like it. But when they're doing blind studies, right? So double blind studies, these people read this thing. I think the one that I'm remembering recently was poetry. People who read poetry made them feel something, they thought it was good. People read poetry they knew was written with AI, they didn't like it as much. They thought I was not great, right? And yeah, Jimmy.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, that's I think that definitely speaks to the general acceptance of AI in creative spaces, right? Just like if you were to, I forget who made the quote, but they said something along the lines of, it's just not as important or doesn't seem as difficult if a 14-year-old can write the script on their phone, right? As opposed to having a writer going through their writing process and coming up with what would be considered a good script. Now, I think there's definitely an argument of whether that's a society, or what aspects of society and culture we're at, where we and these could be the roots for ageism and other larger types of topics. But I think what's important here is that is our approach, right? We do have a couple of clear pathways to choose from in how we want to implement, and to go back to some of the stuff you're talking about is this concept of where we're going to see the acceptance, right? And that goes back to visual effects, because people have grown accustomed to knowing that visual effect is CGI. They know it isn't real, but they're still entertained and intrigued by it when it looks cool, right? Same with animated characters. There is no uncanny valley. There is no expectation of being human. So that's more accepted, regardless if the performance is bad, if what it might look like, things like that. It's accepted at that level. Of course, we have expectations of quality and output and those kinds of things. But accepting that because we know already that it is fake, then there's there isn't that, oh, you're trying to get one over me. And I think that's what that phase of how AI is integrated in the whole filmmaking process is one of those things that we have to take a look at, and might just be an inevitability of just like the labeling. It's like, this generated by AI. No, duh. Of course that was generated by AI. I still found it enjoyable. Those kinds of things. What is the limitation of of that uncanny valley or that labeling type system?
Okay, definitely on the bingo card, there should be a random square that if anybody goes, no, duh, you get a point for that. I love that, Junmi, and we have had conversations. I've been looking at animation for a really long time because I like animation. I think animation and comedy can say things in a way that gets across without it necessarily meaning quite as much who it is that's saying it, because it's a cartoon, but it's a real thing. And Act 2 on Runway just came out. And so Madge may make a resurgence. We're very excited that we could hold a coffee cup and raise it up and down.
Can't wait for Madge.
So what I think is really interesting about this is the sense of entitlement from people who don't know how movies are made now, right? There's something, maybe you remember, maybe you know what the process is called, but there's something where you find a place that's almost correct. Maybe it doesn't have quite as much foliage, and you shoot there, and then you do some sort of compositing process that then makes it look the way that you want.
That's what it's called, compositing.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's all just in here like a jambalaya. Sometimes it comes out correct. But that, but there's no, like, are you kidding? Only half the trees were real? There's no pushback about that. And we don't even know that that's happening. The only reason I know that's happening is because that was one of the things that was exciting about AI video coming out, because now you could just generate the whole thing with the number of trees that you wanted, right? Like, that was a possibility. And I feel like that in this context, that there are real points to be made, but the idea that I need full disclosure about the tools that are being used in the media that I consume is a flawed idea that now. Right? I mean, unless you're in the industry, you have no idea. So There's that sort of thing. Like, I feel like it's coming from a place of like, no, I don't want anything to change. And anything that changes, I need to know. But if I told you that now, instead of doing partial compositing, we're doing full compositing, I don't think you'd know what that meant. Most people.
Yeah, I think there is definitely a portion of the very vocal groups about just broad stroking, anything AI is bad. So if you contribute to it or use it, there's going to be, they push back against that. And I think what this really comes down to is the tech bro equivalent of I will ask for forgiveness as opposed to permission, right?
Yes.
Yes, a lot of works were used unlicensed to produce the existing models. That is a fact. There are now specific models generated with completely licensed. And we were just talking about one, which is a video generation model called Mare from the Moon Valley folks, which is funny because the Moon Valley folks are one of them. They've done significant inroads into using AI or being AI first in productions that they're doing. But Mare was specifically created so that there wouldn't be those concerns anymore. So I think there's going to be more and more specific models like that. And I'm sure the models that are being built for the studios, like I believe Lionsgate, partner with Runway to make a specific model for them that's based on their works, right? So I think the studios are just as concerned about implementing AI and having full control of their IP. So I think when you're talking about AI and how they're used in the studio system, their lawyers are gonna make sure that they're protected when they start using this. So if you hear that a VFX shot was created by Netflix or for a Netflix show and it was used AI, you can guarantee that that has been vetted by Netflix so that they have full control of that IP, whether they think their legal system setup is protecting them or they've created a model that is protecting them. So I think that kind of argument is going to be more and more pushed against in the future because that was brought up. And I think that's what's the significant part, is that kind of awareness was brought up and have created this path where we're now trying to handle things more correctly.
So then I think we need more literacy about what's copyrightable, right? In music, you can't copyright a chord progression. That's too broad, right? And I know IP lawyers, actually, there's an IP lawyer saying, well, you can under certain circumstances, but that's a nuanced thing. I do understand that. But in general, if you like the way this chord progression sounds, you can play your guitar with a similar strum and a similar chord progression, or the exact strum and the exact chord progression in a variety of ways that you could shift that. And I believe that I can set up a shot that references this scenic picture, lighting, etc., in my own film, in my own, like, I can set up a scene that is like copied. All of the elements are copied from something that was in an iconic film scene. And that's considered an homage, or like, oh, isn't that clever? That's not considered stealing. Now, if I had the people saying the same thing, or I had actors' likenesses or those kinds of things, now that gets into that's copied, I think. But that, I think we're going to see a bunch of that. Like, what is an homage and what's stealing?
Right. Right. And the way we tend to do things is to, like when we're children, we try and find out how much can we get away with. And hopefully the response is a slap on the wrist and says, don't ever do that again. But for the most part, it's what, how do we push the barriers and push the frontier, and innovate and things like that if we're too afraid of repercussions. And I think that might be a larger inspection of humans, and outside the scope of this show. So so to
This
wrap up
episode, maybe
for
not
this
this show.
episode, sorry, yes, this episode. So final thoughts on this status of AI in Hollywood or AI in filmmaking.
I'll say that what remains that isn't easily replicated by AI is the idea for the scenes. So that's a combination of writing, a script for the film or for the scenes that you want to produce. You have to come up with an idea. Like, so let's suppose for a moment that I have an AI video generator that just I can talk to. And I can say, here's what I want to see on the screen. That's a combination of, okay, here's the narrative, here are the characters, here's the camera position. Now do it for me and let me see if that's right. Now you're acting like a director, right? And the production process has been substantially automated, eliminating a whole realm of employment in feature film production and or even television series production. But what still has to be happening is someone has to be aware of what the culturally interesting themes are, or what individual relationship dynamics issues are that ought to be depicted in a certain scene, or what some fantastic imaginations are that not everybody's capable of generating that would be interesting to people if I could produce this. So it doesn't, the creative process doesn't go away. It just shifts to a certain sort of overarching directorial role rather than the details of the implementation of the final presentation.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say that I feel for labor and all of the people who are employed in the current process. And the current process is set up to only tell stories that are very popular, because that is part of the financial business model, right? The business model of being able to tell stories in this way at all. And I think that part of what's happening is that is no longer, that does not need to be gate kept. You don't have to go in that gate to do it. Because the other piece, so we didn't talk about this, that is a part of the discussion is like, well, you can make the movie, but you can't, like, you can't plug into the distribution networks. And part of what I find really exciting is that that's no longer really a barrier. And I am super excited about the variety and diversity and the breadth of stories that are going to get told. And I have an ability to see because of these barriers coming down. And I find that really exciting.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think that that mental shift is what is probably the greatest pro for AI. Is if you have to fight so hard to maintain your position in the system, then you might want to take a look at changing that system, right? Is it valuable to us anymore? Is having these large studios important anymore? Should we have new studios? We've seen how Netflix in and of itself was extremely disruptive to cable and, the television market, and even, even film. So do we look at this as an opportunity to massively change how we've been doing things or why we've been doing those things? I think some of the takeaways that we can take away from this discussion is AI is a tool, but we need safeguards to make sure that it isn't it's not replacing, it's additive, right? In everything that we do with AI or create in the creative world, we want to make sure that we maintain our audience's trust. So we want to always strive for the highest quality or those intrinsic type of qualities or takeaways from our art. And the plain fact is that jobs will change, whether that be loss, replacement, or just new, different jobs. I'm sure it'll be a factor of all three. But when it comes to filmmaking, at its core is storytelling. So there will be some who will adapt to look at AI as, here is my new set of tools that I can do my storytelling. And what I'm hoping for is that it will enable more people to be able to tell their stories and express their ideas and emotions through this type of medium that they have more access to now, and tell grander stories or more detailed stories, from the micro to the, the macro to the micro and things like that. Okay. Well, I think this is a good spot for us to stop. Thank you both for engaging in this conversation about AI in filmmaking, and all under our starting story of how AI is being used as visual effects in the latest Netflix series, The Aethernaut. All right, tomorrow we have the news, so please join us for that. If anyone has any input or what they'd like to see from my hopefully considered creative intros, please let me know. Drop me a line. I'd love to see ideas and things I can express through that process. Thursday, we've got China's AI advantage in the auto industry. We're seeing a lot of talk about the EV market in particular, but we'll discuss how AI is really ramping up China's auto industry. And then on Friday, Recaps and Rabbit Holes, our bi-weekly look back and look around at various topics in the AI space. And I'm sure someone will bring something that they're just hyper focused on, and we'll just discuss that for an hour straight. I've done it before myself, so I expect great things. Other than that, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on the live stream, taking part in the conversation in the chat. And if you all want to continue that conversation, please head over to the dailyAIshowcommunity.com to sign up or get into the Slack channel. And this is where we will drop new info and allow for the community to discuss amongst itself and with the DAS crew. Other than that, expect a Saturday Conundrum video and podcast episode to come out, as well as Sunday's newsletter. So like, subscribe, click the bell, and join us tomorrow for another episode of the Daily AI Show. Aloha.